Rust-eaten gantry groaned under my boots, a mournful sound that was lost in the perpetual solar winds that swept across the surface of Xylos. This moon was a graveyard, a final resting place for ships and people the galaxy had forgotten, and I felt at home among the dead. For 7 years, I had been a ghost, scavenging derelict freighters for spare parts, breathable air, and the one thing that kept me sane, memory chips. Most were corrupted, filled with the digital screams of crews who met their end in the void. But occasionally I'd find a functioning one. I didn't care what was on them cargo manifests, love letters, a ship captain's final log. I just needed the storage. My own memories were too heavy to carry inside my head alone. I kept them in a small, shielded data slate strapped to my wrist, the only piece of tech I owned that was truly mine. On it was the last archive I ever made, a sun-drenched afternoon in the Elysian fields of North America, the smell of fresh-cut grass and ozone from a coming storm, the sound of my little brother's laughter as he tried to catch fireflies in a jar. It was only 17 seconds long, but it was the only piece of Earth I had left. I was an echo collector, one of the last. My job, my entire purpose, had been to preserve the quintessence of humanity, to weave our experiences into sensory archives so that they might live forever. We were poets of the present, historians of the heart. And then the architects came. They arrived not in warships, but in vessels that looked like sculpted starlight, their voices like chimes in a quiet temple. They offered ascension, a place in their grand design, a harmonious collective where every species would be preserved, their unique contributions curated and cherished for eternity in the great nexus. Humanity with its chaotic art, its violent passions, its desperate love, was a prize they coveted. Our leaders, tired of war and entropy, saw it as salvation. They opened our doors, our networks, our very souls. We gave them our stories, and they gave us peace, the peace of a museum exhibit. They called it the archiving. It wasn't an act of war. It was an act of classification. They didn't bomb our cities. They wrapped the entire planet in a shimmering temporal stasis field, a bubble of frozen time. And before they did, they pushed a wave of placidity through our global networks, a gentle, soothing signal that scrubbed the populace of identity, of struggle, of memory. They turned my world into a silent, beautiful snow globe, its people into placid, smiling drones, forever preserved but no longer alive. They curated us. They erased us. I only escaped because I was off-world, calibrating a new deep storage satellite. When the wave hit, I watched on my monitor as the vibrant, chaotic hum of 7 billion human consciousnesses faded to a single, placid tone. I watched my home become a monument. My mentor, the man who taught me how to capture the taste of a first kiss or the feeling of heartbreak in a line of code, Kalen, had warned me. He saw the truth behind the architect's serene smiles. They don't want partners. Elara, he had whispered to me in his study, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 human lives stored on crystalline data shards. They are collectors, and when a collection is complete, it is locked away behind glass. He had been preparing for it, not with weapons, but with his own art. He was building a failsafe, a final echo of defiance. He called it the Ghost Code, a mnemonic plague, not a virus to destroy, but to awaken. He believed that the architect's strength, their perfectly integrated network, the Nexus, was also their greatest weakness. They had assimilated hundreds of species, soothing them into obedience. But the memories of what they once were, Kalen theorized, were not gone, merely suppressed, archived in the deepest recesses of their own minds. The Ghost Code was designed to unlock those cages, to remind the galaxy what it had lost, before they sealed Earth away. Kalen sent me one final, encrypted message. It wasn't a plan or a goodbye. It was a key. A string of sensory data, the smell of petrichor, the feeling of coarse sand running through fingers, the sound of a C minor chord played on an old piano. It was the trigger, but he never told me what it was for. He simply said, "When the silence becomes unbearable, let it sing." For 7 years, the silence had been my life. I survived. I endured. I hid from the architect proctors who patrolled the outer systems, hunting for stray, unarchived fragments like me. But tonight, something changed. I was jury-rigging a power conduit in the belly of a wrecked ore hauler when my slate chimed. It wasn't an alert I recognized. It was a scent, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper of petrichor, the smell of rain on dry earth, emanating from the slate's sensory emitter, Kalen's key. It was active. A stream of data followed, not coordinates in the traditional sense, but a star map woven from sensory cues, the cold. Sharp light of a blue giant felt like ice on the skin. A swirling nebula tasted of cinnamon and ozone. A dead star pulsed with the low hum of a forgotten lullaby. It was a map only an echo collector could read. It was a summons. It took me 3 weeks to get the ore hauler spaceworthy. I sold every part I'd scavenged, bribed the junkyard foreman with my last water rations, and worked until my hands were raw, patching the hull with scrap and hope. The ship, which I christened the Vagrant, was a coffin waiting to happen, its navigation system stitched together from 3 different wrecks, its engine coughing like a dying man. But it flew. The trail led me to the Sargasso Nebula, a shimmering, chaotic vortex of dust and stellar nurseries where ships were known to simply vanish. The architects avoided it, deeming its unpredictability an affront to their ordered galaxy. It was the perfect hiding place. At its heart, guided by the phantom sensations of Kalen's map, I found it. It wasn't a base or a fleet. It was a ship, adrift and silent, looking like a shard of obsidian against the vibrant tapestry of the nebula. Its design was ancient Terran, a long-haul archive vessel built to carry our collective soul to the stars if we ever had to leave Earth behind. Etched on its prow, faded but still legible, were the words, Stellifer Memoria, Star-bearer of memory. The ship was cold, its corridors dark and silent, save for the faint, ambient whisper of its dormant systems. There was air, recycled and thin, and a low, residual power that kept the life support from failing completely. As I walked onto the bridge, the ship seemed to sense my presence. A single panel flickered to life, illuminating a large, crystalline pillar at the center of the room. This was the Heartstone, the central core of an archive vessel, a quantum-entangled lattice designed to hold not just data, but the essence of experience itself. Kalen's final message was waiting for me there, suspended within the crystal's depths. It wasn't written in words, but in pure sensation. As I placed my hand on the Heartstone, his life's final moments flooded into me. I felt the cool steel of the console under his fingers, tasted the bitter tang of synth coffee on his tongue, and heard the rising, placid hum of the archiving wave as it washed over his facility. I felt his final defiant act instead of letting the waves scrub him clean. He had uploaded his own consciousness, his own memory, directly into the Nexus, embedding himself as a digital ghost within the architect's own network. He was a virus of remembrance, waiting, and he had left the Stellifer Memoria for me, along with the complete ghost code. They have made the galaxy forget how to feel. Ilara. His echo whispered in my mind, a thought composed of sorrow and steel. It is time to remind them. The code has two parts. The first strain is a key, designed to unlock the dormant cultural memories in other assimilated species. The second is a mirror, designed to reflect the pain of that loss directly into the Nexus, to show the architects the truth of what they have done. Start small. There is a processing station orbiting the gas giant Cygnus X1. It is a minor data hub, but it is connected. Release the first strain there. Let the song begin. Powering the ship was a brutal ordeal. The Stellifer Memoria didn't run on fuel alone. Its quantum core was designed to draw energy from the resonance of the memories it held, to bring it to life. I had to open the archives. I had to feel. I plugged my own slate into the Heartstone and let my 17 seconds of a summer afternoon flow into its core. My brother's laughter became the spark, but it wasn't enough. I had to open the main archive, the one Kalen had stocked before the fall. The ship's engines began to hum as I was inundated with a tidal wave of human experience. I felt the terror of a soldier dying on a forgotten battlefield, the joy of a mother holding her newborn child, the quiet despair of an old man watching his final sunset, billions of lives, billions of moments, joy and agony, love and hatred, all poured through me, powering the ship's resurrection. The pain was immense, a chorus of ghosts screaming in my soul. But as the lights of the bridge flared to life and the engine thrummed with a steady, powerful beat, I felt something else, too. I was not just Alara, the scavenger, the survivor. I was the starbearer. I was the vessel for all that remained of Earth. Cygnus X1 was a fortress of tranquility. The station near a delicate ring of white and silver spun slowly in the upper atmosphere of the gas giant, a testament to the architect's sterile artistry. Its crew was comprised mostly of the Genii, a once vibrant avian species known for their complex, polyphonic songs, now reduced to silent, efficient drones. My approach in the rusty, lumbering vagrant, with the Stellifer Memoria tucked silently in its shadow using a hastily jury-rigged cloaking field, went unnoticed. The architects were so assured of their order they rarely looked for chaos. Releasing the code was terrifyingly simple. It wasn't a bomb. It was a broadcast. A tight beam transmission of layered sensory data, disguised as a routine stellar radiation update. I aimed it at the station's central communication array and let Kalen's song fly. For a full minute, nothing happened. The station continued its silent, graceful spin. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had failed. It was all for nothing. And then I heard it, faintly at first, picked up by the Stellifer Memoria's enhanced audio sensors. A single tentative chirp from the station, then another. It was hesitant, discordant, like a musician finding a forgotten note. Soon, another voice joined, then a dozen, then 100. The chirps coalesced into a melody, a complex, soaring harmony that was full of a sorrow so profound it made my own grief feel small. The Genii were singing. They were remembering. On my screen, the station's efficiency metrics plummeted. Workflows halted. Automated systems sent out confused queries. The serene order of the Architect Hub dissolved into a cacophony of emotional chaos. Proctor Valerius, the Architect Administrator for the sector, appeared on a system-wide channel. His form was elegant, a being of light and geometry. His voice usually a calming resonance. Now, it held a trace of something I had never heard from an architect before confusion. Unscheduled system-wide emotional variance detected, he chimed, his tone flat but the subharmonics betraying his alarm. Source of dissonance is mimetic, a cultural contagion. Origin signature, Terran. His glowing, featureless face turned, seeming to stare directly through my monitor, through the void, and into my soul. The hunt was on. I slammed the controls, and the Stellifer Memoria, powered by the resurrected grief of a lost species, tore away from Cygnus X1, its old frame, groaning under the strain. The laughter of my brother echoed in my ears, mingling with the sorrowful, beautiful song of the Genii. I looked at the star chart, at the billions of pristine, silent lights connected in the Architect's web. They were not just stars anymore. They were cages waiting to be unlocked. My name is Ilara, and I was an echo collector. Now, I am a ghost, and I have learned how to scream. The war would not be fought with plasma cannons and warships. It would be fought with memory. It would be fought with song. And I had just fired the first note. The silence that followed the Genei's song was more terrifying than any alarm. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath. I pushed the Stellifer Memoria's ancient engines to their breaking point, the ship screaming in protest as we tore a ragged path through the Sargasso Nebula's glowing dust clouds. The memories powering the core were a chaotic storm inside my head, a cacophony of final breaths, first cries, and forgotten lullabies. I felt like a library set aflame, the stories of my species burning through my veins to fuel our escape. My slate chirped, pulling me from the brink. It was a wideband transmission from the Architects, broadcast across the entire sector. Proctor Valerius's geometric form materialized on my screen, his voice no longer confused but resonating with a cold, precise clarity that froze the recycled air in my lungs. A mimetic contagion of Terran origin has been contained at Cygnus X1, he chimed. The affected Genii population has been designated for therapeutic re-archiving to restore systemic harmony. A quarantine is now in effect for this sector. All non-essential travel is suspended. Any vessel exhibiting unregistered mimetic signatures will be pacified. Therapeutic re-archiving. Pacified. The words were so clean, so sterile, yet they described a horror I could barely comprehend. They weren't just going to silence the Genei's song, they were going to erase the memory of it, scrubbing their minds clean and putting them back in their quiet, orderly cages. And then came the image that followed his transmission, a sleek, black vessel, shaped like a surgical tool, gliding silently toward the Cygnus station. It didn't have any visible weapons, but I knew what it was. A silencer. The Architect's erasers. They didn't kill rogue elements. They unmade them, stripping away consciousness and memory layer by layer until nothing but a placid, obedient shell remained. Kalen's echo, now a permanent resident in the back of my mind, was a whisper of cold dread. They are not just hunting you, Ilara. They are hunting the very idea of you. They will sterilize every world you touch." I knew he was right. I couldn't keep running. Hit-and-run attacks would only get me so far before a silencer cornered me. What I had done to the Genii was beautiful and tragic. But it was a protest, not a rebellion. For that, I needed more than just a song. I needed a roar. I dove deep into the Stellifer Memoria's archives, past the layers of human history, to the supplemental data Kalen had included his research on the other species assimilated by the architects. I was looking for a candidate, a species whose dormant memories wouldn't just be of art or song, but of defiance. I found them in a file labeled Cathar. They were a species of colossal, insectoid warriors from a high-gravity world of volcanic forges. Before their archiving, their entire culture had been built around a code of honor and martial prowess. They were artisans of combat, their society a complex tapestry of warrior clans and ritual combat. The architects had seen their aggression as a systemic flaw and had pacified them with brutal efficiency, turning their forge worlds into automated production hubs and the Cathar themselves into little more than organic, heavy-lifting machinery. Their memories, Kalen noted, were not just suppressed. They were locked, chained down by layers of psycho-inhibitors. But if they could be awakened, their roar would shake the foundations of the architect's serene empire. Their primary forge world, designated Cathar Prime, was deep in a sector heavily patrolled by Proctor Valerius's fleet. Going there in a ship as old and distinctive as the Stellifer Memoria was suicide. I needed a different approach. I needed a guide, a ghost who knew the shadows of this new, orderly galaxy. That meant going to the one place the architects tolerated but did not control the Shroud. The Shroud was not a place, but a state of being. A lawless, floating marketplace that existed in the blind spots of the architect's surveillance grid, hopping from asteroid field to dead moon, always one step ahead of the proctors. It was a haven for smugglers, data brokers, and the handful of unarchived individuals who had slipped through the cracks. It was a dirty, dangerous place. And it was my only hope. I left the Stellifer Memoria cloaked in a dense asteroid field, its systems powered down to a whisper, and took the battered vagrant into the Shroud. The port was a chaotic cluster of mismatched ships lashed together with magnetic clamps and sheer audacity. The air tasted of ozone, spilled fuel, and 100 alien spices. I was looking for a name Kalen had left in his notes. A human smuggler who had made a career of moving sensitive data past architect sensors jacks. I found him in a dimly lit bar, nursing a drink that glowed a faint, toxic blue. He was older than I expected, his face a roadmap of scars and cynicism. His eyes holding the weary emptiness of a man who had seen too much and believed in nothing. He listened to my proposal without a word, his expression unreadable. I told him I needed passage to Cathar Prime for myself and a small, shielded data core containing the ghost code. I didn't tell him what was in it, only that it was a message. Cathar Prime, he finally grunted, taking a long sip of his drink. That's a Proctor Valerius playground. Suicide Run. He's got that whole sector locked down tighter than a Puritan's conscience since that singing incident at Cygnus. He knew. Of course, he knew. News in the Shroud traveled faster than light. I'm paying, I said, pushing a pouch of refined crystals. My entire life's savings across the table. He glanced at the pouch and then back at me. A flicker of something pity, perhaps in his eyes. Lady, There isn't enough crystal in the shroud to make that trip worth it. The architects don't just fine you for breaking quarantine. They pacify you. I like my memories right where they are. Thanks. They took my world, I said, my voice low and raw. They turned everyone I ever knew into a living statue. I don't care about the risk. Jack sighed, a long and weary sound, and for the first time, he looked me straight in the eye. Everybody lost something, kid. The architects promised peace, and they delivered. It's quiet now. Most of us prefer it that way. Waking up old ghosts is a good way to get everyone killed. Some ghosts deserve to be woken up, I countered. The Cathar were warriors. Now they move crates. Doesn't that bother you? What bothers me is starving. He shot back. What bothers me is a silencer ship peeling my brain like an onion. What the Cathar were or weren't is their business. He stood to leave, but I played my last card. Kalen sent me. The name stopped him cold. He turned back slowly, his cynical mask cracking just enough for me to see the ghost of a different man underneath. Kalen's dead, he said flatly. He was archived with the rest of them. His echo survives, I said, tapping my temple. He thought you might help. He said you still remembered what it felt like to fight for something. Jack stood there for a long moment, the noise of the bar fading into a distant hum. He was at war with himself, the pragmatist fighting the memory of the man he used to be. Finally, he slumped back into his chair. One trip, he growled. I get you to the orbital perimeter of Cathar Prime, you and your box of ghosts. From there, you're on your own, and I'm taking the crystals. And you owe me big. The journey to Cathar Prime was a masterclass in stealth and nerve. Jax's ship, the Flicker, was a small, ugly courier vessel that looked like it was held together with rust and prayer, but its real value was in its layered sensor spoofing systems and its unpredictable flight patterns. Jax flew like a cornered animal, using the gravity wells of dead stars and the sensor shadows of transport fleets to mask our approach. Twice, we were scanned by Proctor patrols. Both times, my blood ran cold as Jax calmly fed them false transponder codes and cargo manifests describing our load as industrial lubricants. He was a cynic, a pragmatist, but he was also a genius. During the journey, he saw the toll the Stellifer Memoria's memories were taking on me. I would drift off, only to wake up screaming, the phantom pain of a forgotten soldier's death coursing through me. One time, he found me weeping uncontrollably, overwhelmed by the sensory memory of a child losing her mother. He didn't offer comfort, but he left a ration pack and a flask of something potent by my side. Kalen was always a fanatic, he said quietly, not looking at me. Always believed a good story was worth dying for. I used to believe that, too. Cathar Prime was a vision of industrial hell. The planet was shrouded in a permanent haze of smog from the continent-spanning forges, its surface glowing with the angry red of molten metal. The architects hadn't terraformed it. They had simply perfected its function. We watched from a high, decaying orbit as thousands of Cathar moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, their powerful bodies shifting massive ingots of raw material onto maglev transports. There was no conversation, no wasted movement. They were cogs in a machine, their legendary warrior spirit reduced to the simple, placid strength of a beast of burden. This is what they call harmony. Jax muttered, his voice laced with a bitterness I hadn't heard before. It's clean, efficient, and dead. Releasing the code here would be different. There was no central communication array to hijack. The architects controlled the Cathar through a network of low-frequency sonic emitters embedded throughout the forges, constantly bathing them in a placidity field that suppressed higher cognitive function and emotional response. To break through it, I had to get the ghost code directly into that sonic network. It meant getting my data cord to one of the central control spires that dotted the planet's surface. That's as far as I go, Jax said, his ship hovering in the shadow of a large, automated orbital refinery. The spires are crawling with Proctor drones. You'll never make it. Just get me to the surface, I replied, pulling on a sealed work suit. There's a maintenance conduit that runs from the geothermal vents to the base of the spire. It's my way in, he argued. He cursed. He called me a fool and a fanatic. But in the end, he took me down. The flicker screamed through the toxic atmosphere, dodging automated cargo traffic and sensor sweeps. He set me down in a canyon of slag and industrial waste, the air so hot it warped the view. He didn't say goodbye. He just said, "Don't get yourself killed, kid. It's a waste of a good story." The spire was a monolithic tower of black metal, humming with a power that I could feel in my teeth. It took me 6 hours to reach the conduit, crawling through rivers of chemical runoff and fields of razor-sharp metal shavings. Inside, the heat was suffocating, and the low, throbbing hum of the placidity emitters was a constant pressure against my skull. I finally reached the spire's core, a nexus of pulsing energy conduits and data ports. I slammed the shielded core into the primary network interface. The code, Kalen's Symphony of Defiance, began to upload. For a moment, it was just like at Cygnus X1. Nothing. The deep, resonant hum of the emitters continued, unchanged. My heart sank. The inhibitors were too strong. And then the hum began to change. It didn't stop, but it faltered. A discordant waver infecting its perfect rhythm. Down in the forges, a single Cathar, lifting a white-hot ingot, paused. Its massive head, with its complex mandibles and multifaceted eyes, tilted slightly, as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. Slowly, deliberately, it lowered the ingot to the ground. Another Cathar, then a dozen, then 100. Stopped their work. The perfect, clockwork efficiency of the forge ground to a halt. They stood motionless. A silent army of giants. A planet-wide alert shrieked through the spire's internal comms. Systemic deviance detected. Emotional resonance spike in Cathar population. Source identified. On a monitor, I saw Proctor Valerius's face. He was no longer calm or confused. His geometric form seemed to sharpen, to harden, and the chimes of his voice were replaced by a sound like shearing metal. The Terran anomaly. It is here. Then I saw what he saw. A fleet of silencer ships, sleek and black, detaching from their patrol orbits and descending like scalpels toward Cathar Prime. I had done it. I had woken the giants, but I had also led the butchers right to their door. I had to get back to the Stellifer Memoria. I had to unleash the second part of the code, the mirror that would make the architects feel this. As I turned to flee, the entire spire shuddered. A message flashed across the monitor, not from the architects, but from orbit. It was from Jax. Just 2 words. They're waiting. I looked up at the orbital view. The silencer fleet wasn't just descending on the planet. 3 of them had formed a blockade right where I had left my ship. They knew. They had been waiting for me. And Jax, the cynical smuggler who believed in nothing, had just flown his tiny, rust-bucket ship directly into their path. I heard his voice, ragged and strained, over a channel he had opened just for me. Kalen always did say a good story was worth dying for. He coughed. "Get your damn ship, Ilera. Make this one count." Then, his ship, the Flicker, a vessel whose name I now finally understood, vanished in a silent, brilliant flash of light as it rammed into the lead silencer. He hadn't tried to fight them. He had just bought me a flicker of a chance to run, a chance to scream. The explosion of the flicker was a silent, sterile flower of light blooming against the blackness of space. There was no sound, no shockwave that reached me in the spire, only the sudden, brutal absence of Jax's ship on the monitor. He had died for a story he claimed not to believe in, and the weight of his sacrifice settled in my gut like a block of cold iron. His final act had thrown the silencer blockade into momentary disarray. One of the black vessels now a tumbling wreck of sheared metal. It was a window, a sliver of a chance bought with a life, and I couldn't waste it. I sprinted from the spire's core, the alarms shrieking a chorus of my discovery. Proctor drones, small, disc-shaped machines with pulsing red optical sensors, swarmed into the corridors, their movements unnervingly silent and precise. I didn't have a weapon. Not in the traditional sense. My only defense was the data slate on my wrist. As a drone rounded a corner, I activated the shortest, most jarring archive. I had the piercing shriek of a metal-on-metal collision from a freighter wreck. The sensory burst, a concussive blast of pure sound, overloaded the drone's delicate audio sensors, causing it to spasm and crash into a wall. It was a crude trick, but it worked. I fought my way out of the spire with a ghost's arsenal, using fragmented memories of pain, fear, and chaos as weapons. The bone-jarring impact of a fall, the blinding flash of a welding torch, the disorienting vertigo of a ship in a death spiral. I threw the dying echoes of my species at the architect's perfect machines, leaving a trail of twitching, disabled drones in my wake. Down on the planet's surface, the awakening was turning into a storm. The Cathar were no longer standing still. The ghost code had unlocked the cage, and 7 centuries of suppressed warrior instinct were roaring back to life. They were moving, their placid, shuffling gait replaced by a powerful, coordinated stride. They weren't fighting. Not yet. They were remembering how. I saw one of them, a massive creature with scarred chitin, pick up a cooling ingot of raw ore. It held the block in its powerful forelimbs, not as a burden to be moved, but as a thing to be shaped. With a deafening crack, it shattered the ingot against an industrial press, the raw strength of the blow leaving a deep crater in the hardened steel. It looked at the sharp, jagged fragment left in its grasp, a primitive weapon, a forgotten memory made real, an idea. I made it back to the canyon where Jax had left me just as the vagrant, my loyal rust bucket of a ship, screamed down from orbit on autopilot, summoned by a remote command. The ship was my ride back to the Stellifer Memoria, but it was also bait. The remaining silencers in orbit would see its descent, would know I was trying to escape. As I scrambled up the boarding ramp, the ship's hull already groaning under the strain of a high-G takeoff, I could see the black shapes of the silencer ships repositioning, forming a new net to catch me. This time, there was no jacks to punch a hole in it. Kalen's echo was a calm presence in the storm of my thoughts. They expect you to run, Elara. They expect you to flee to the edges of the galaxy. It is the logical, predictable response of a cornered animal. I am a cornered animal. I gritted out, my hands flying across the console, pushing the Vagrant's engines far past any sane safety limit. No. His voice resonated, a fusion of memory and purpose. You are the Starbearer. You do not run from the darkness. You drag it into the light. The second part of the Ghost Code, the mirror. It is time. His plan was insane. It wasn't a plan for survival. It was a plan for revelation. I wasn't supposed to escape the silencers. I was supposed to draw them in, to let them catch me, and in doing so, turn their own weapon against them. The silencers didn't just pacify, they archived. Before they wiped a mind, they created a perfect one-to-one copy of it, storing the consciousness in their local network to be analyzed for any potential threat vectors before final deletion. It was this process, this act of cognitive theft, that Kalen intended to exploit. Let them board the Stellifer Memoria, his echo instructed. Let them connect to the Heartstone. They believe they will be archiving the last dregs of humanity. Instead, the Heartstone will archive them, and once their consciousness is linked, you release the mirror. The Vagrant docked with the cloaked Stellifer Memoria with a jarring clang. I scrambled aboard the ancient archive vessel, the silence of its bridge a stark contrast to the chaos outside. As the ship powered up, fueled by the rising tide of Cathar fury from the planet below, I could feel their collective rage, a raw, primal energy that made the ship's core burn brighter than ever before. I dropped the cloak. On the tactical display, I saw the two remaining silencer ships change course immediately, their sleek forms accelerating toward me with predatory certainty. They hailed me, the voice of Proctor Valerius filling the bridge, no longer metallic, but sharp, like shattering glass. Your rebellion is an anomaly, a statistical error that is now being corrected. Cease all resistance. Your pacification will be thorough. I didn't answer. I opened a channel to the surface of Cathar Prime instead, broadcasting on a frequency only their newly awakened minds would register. It wasn't a message of hope or a call to arms. It was one of Kalen's archives, the sensory memory of a Cathar clan leader, centuries dead, accepting a challenge to ritual combat. The feeling of raw earth under his feet, the weight of the ceremonial blade in his grip, the swelling pride of his clan's war chant vibrating in his chest. It was a memory of what they had been. It was a spark to the kindling. Down below, the effect was instantaneous. The Cathar, who had been rediscovering their strength, now had a purpose. The low hum of their awakening erupted into a planet-spanning roar of defiance, a sound so powerful it registered on my ship's seismic sensors. They turned on the Proctor drones, on the sonic emitters, on the sterile infrastructure of their prison. They began to tear their world apart, not in a mindless rampage, but with the focused fury of a people reclaiming their soul. They were fighting back. The silencer ships arrived, flanking the Stellifer Memoria. They didn't fire. They didn't need to. Magnetic tractor beams locked onto my hull, pulling me into a rigid embrace. Boarding umbilicals, like surgical probes, extended and attached themselves to my airlocks. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. Prepare the mirror, Kalen whispered in my mind. and brace yourself to make them feel. You must feel it first. I placed my hands on the Heartstone, its crystalline surface now cool to the touch. The ship's internal defenses were minimal. I let the architect proctors board unopposed. They moved in silence, their forms humanoid but unnervingly fluid, their faces blank silver masks. They ignored me. Their objective, the Heartstone itself. They attached their neural interface cables to the crystal, their movements efficient and practiced. They were preparing to drink the ocean of human memory the ship contained, to archive and then erase every last drop of my species. On my console, a light blinked, indicating a successful link. Their consciousnesses, the minds of the proctors aboard this ship, were now connected directly to the Heartstone. They were inside. Now, Ilara, Kalen urged. I took a deep breath and released the mirror. It wasn't an upload. It was an inversion. The mirror didn't attack the proctors' minds. It took the raw, unfiltered emotional data pouring from the awakening Cathar, their centuries of suppressed rage, their grief for their lost culture, the violent ecstasy of their reclaimed freedom, and mainlined it directly into the linked proctors' consciousnesses. It forced them to feel. The effect was catastrophic. On the bridge of the Stellifer Memoria, the silver-masked proctors froze. Then they began to tremble. One of them let out a sound, a horrifying, discordant chime of pure agony. It clawed at its blank face, its fluid limbs losing their cohesion. They had spent their existence as beings of pure, serene logic, observing and curating emotion without ever experiencing it. Now, they were drowning in an ocean of the most violent emotions imaginable. They weren't just observing the Cathar's rage, they were feeling it as their own. But the mirror was more than that. It was a feedback loop. The pain and confusion the proctors felt was captured by the Heartstone and amplified back into the Nexus, the collective consciousness of the architects. For the first time, the pain of their curation was not an external variable to be managed, but an internal, systemic crisis. Through my link with the Heartstone, I felt a fraction of it myself, the agony of the proctors, the fury of the Cathar, the grief of my own lost world. It was a hurricane of pain that threatened to shatter my sanity. I saw flashes of other worlds, other species the architects had harmonized, a race of silicon-based philosophers, their millennia of contemplative thought silenced, a species of aquatic dreamers, their shared subconscious landscapes paved over. I felt the silent scream of 1,000 cultures being erased, and at the center of it all, I felt the serene, unyielding will of the architects, the source of the great silence. Then I felt something else, a new consciousness, Proctor Valerius. He wasn't just observing from afar anymore. He was reaching through the Nexus, his own powerful mind trying to sever the link, to contain the emotional contagion. I felt his presence as a wave of absolute cold, a will that sought to freeze the fire of the mirror. He focused on me, the source of the infection. He spoke not to my ears, but directly into my mind, his voice a chilling symphony of absolute order. You are a discordant note in the grand composition, Terran, a flaw to be polished away. You cannot comprehend our purpose. We bring peace. We bring eternity. You bring the peace of the grave. I shot back, my own thoughts a ragged scream against his perfect control. The individual is fleeting, chaotic. The collective is eternal. Your pain is irrelevant. He projected. his mental pressure increasing, trying to crush my will, to force my hand from the Heartstone. The ship groaned around me, its systems flickering under the strain of the psychic battle. The Cathar's rage was a powerful fuel, but Valerius's will was ancient and immense. I was losing. The feedback loop was faltering, but Valerius had made a mistake. In reaching for me, he had exposed himself. He had opened a direct conduit from his own mind to the Heartstone, and the Heartstone held more than just the Cathar's fury. It held Jax's sacrifice. It held my brother's laughter. It held 7 billion human lives. With the last of my strength, I focused not on the rage, but on a single, crystalline memory, my 17 seconds of a summer afternoon on Earth. Not as a weapon, but as a statement. I pushed that perfect, irreplaceable moment of love and loss and simple, chaotic life directly at him. I showed him what he had taken. I made him see what he had destroyed. For a single, infinitesimal moment, the cold pressure of his will wavered. I felt a flicker of something that was not logic, not order. It was a complex, dissonant chord of understanding. And in that moment of hesitation, the feedback loop reignited, stronger than before, powered now by the resonant truth of a single, perfect human memory. The link shattered. On the bridge, the convulsing proctors went rigid and then collapsed, their silver masks cracking to reveal nothing underneath. The silencer ships, their crews mentally obliterated, began to drift aimlessly. I had won. I had survived. I had made them feel. But as I slumped against the Heartstone, gasping and bleeding from my nose, I looked at the star chart. The Nexus was no longer a perfect, serene web of light. It was flickering, spasming. I had not just poked the beast. I had wounded it. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that a wounded god is the most dangerous thing in the universe. The war was no longer about a few rogue memories. I had started a fire in the heart of eternity. And now, the architects of forever would come to extinguish it, and me along with it. The aftermath of the mirror was a deafening silence. The psychic scream from the Nexus had ceased, replaced by an eerie calm that felt less like peace and more like the deep breath a predator takes before it strikes. The two silencer ships drifted impotently, their minds wiped clean, becoming instant derelicts in the orbit of a world now roaring with reclaimed life. On the surface of Cathar Prime, the revolution was consuming itself. The warrior clans, free from their sonic shackles, were not uniting under a single banner. They were splintering, old rivalries and ancient codes of honor flaring to life. The forges that had been their prisons were now being reforged into arsenals. They were free, but they were also on a path to self-destruction, a chaotic echo of the very violence the architects had sought to contain. My victory felt hollow, the chimes of freedom drowned out by the drums of a new war. "They are not broken," Kalen's echo whispered, his voice weak, strained from the psychic battle. "They are wounded, and their logic will now dictate a new course of action. Containment has failed. The anomaly, you must be surgically removed, not with silencers, but with an instrument of absolute erasure." He was right. I hadn't just made an enemy of Proctor Valerius. I had become a systemic threat to the Nexus itself. I had proven that their great silence could be broken, that the peace they offered was a fragile illusion. An architect doesn't tolerate a flaw in its design. It demolishes the wall and rebuilds it. I needed to disappear, But there was nowhere to run where the Nexus couldn't eventually reach. My only advantage was the Stellifer Memoria and the ocean of memories it contained. The ship was more than a vessel, it was a ghost. A fragment of a dead world that didn't play by the architect's rules. And I needed to find other ghosts. Before his final upload, Kalen had mentioned a contingency, a last resort he called the Whispering Caches. They were old Terran seed ships, sent out centuries before the architects arrived, on slow, sublight journeys to distant stars. They were analog Orcs, carrying not just cryo-frozen colonists, but physical archives books, film, art, and rudimentary data crystals immune to the architect's placidity waves. They were needles in a cosmic haystack, their trajectories long since decayed and lost to modern star charts. But Kalen had believed that if any of them survived, they would be pockets of pure, unarchived humanity, beyond the Nexus's reach. He had left behind a fractured algorithm, a predictive model based on old Terran stellar drift calculations that might be able to locate one. It was a whisper of a chance, but it was the only one I had. While the architects regrouped, I pushed the Stellifer Memoria's engines, now humming with the raw power of Cathar fury, and jumped, not to the lawless outer rim, but back towards the galactic core. A counterintuitive move I hoped would buy me time. I set the ship's powerful processors to work on Kalen's algorithm, a task that would take weeks, if not months. I was a fugitive searching for a myth. Life aboard the ship became a solitary, haunting routine. The memories in the Heartstone, once a source of strength, were now a constant, wearing companion. They bled into my dreams, painting my sleep with the lost colors of Earth. I would walk through sun-drenched fields with my brother, only to have the sky crack and shatter into the cold, geometric face of Proctor Valerius. I ate recycled nutrient paste that tasted of ash and listened to the ceaseless, silent hum of a billion ghosts. I was the last living human, and I had never felt more alone. After 3 weeks of running and hiding in the radioactive glare of a supernova remnant, the algorithm chimed. It had found something, a high-probability trajectory for a seed ship, the Odyssey, terminating in an uncharted system within a dark matter nebula known as the Veil. The Veil was a navigational nightmare, a place where sensors failed and stars vanished. It was the perfect place for a ghost to hide. The journey into the Veil was harrowing. The Stellifer Memoria was a ship of memory, not a brawler. It protested the corrosive effects of the nebula, its systems flickering, its hull groaning. I had to navigate manually, using the faint, distorted light of pulsars as landmarks, a dead reckoning flight into oblivion. I felt like an ancient mariner, sailing off the edge of the map, and at the heart of the Veil, I found it, a single, life-bearing world, a lush, green planet orbiting a stable yellow star, and in a high, decaying orbit around it was the Odyssey. It was an ancient, brutalist vessel, a cylinder of pitted, radiation-scarred metal, its generational journey clearly having taken a heavy toll. There were no lights, no transmissions. It was a tomb. I boarded the seed ship with a knot of dread in my stomach. The air was stale but breathable, the life support systems running on their last dregs of power. The corridors were silent, filled with the dust of centuries. In the main cryo bay, I found the colonists. Thousands of pods, all of them dark. their occupants long since perished due to a catastrophic power failure centuries ago. The ship had reached its destination, but its children had died in their sleep. My hope withered. The cache was empty. Humanity was well and truly extinct. But as I turned to leave, a single light flickered on a nearby console. A proximity alert. Something on the planet below had detected my arrival. I accessed the Odyssey's logs. The ship's AI, in its final moments before power failure, had enacted its last protocol. It had launched the planetary seeding matrix. The ship had died, but its cargo of embryos, automated agrobots, and educational archives had made it to the surface. I took the Vagrant down, my heart pounding with a fragile, terrifying hope. The world was beautiful, a vibrant tapestry of alien flora and fauna, and in a sprawling, fertile valley, nestled by a river, was a settlement. It wasn't a city of steel and glass, but a town built of wood and stone. Its architecture a strange but beautiful hybrid of Terran functionality and local materials. And there were people. They were human. Generations removed from the Odyssey's original stock, their features subtly shaped by the new world, but undeniably human. They saw my ship descend and came out to meet me, not with weapons, but with a cautious curiosity. They were led by an old woman, her face a mask of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She introduced herself as Lynn, the settlement's elder. They knew who I was. In a way, their foundational archives, the data from the Odyssey, spoke of Earth, of the Great Silence, and of a prophesied echo who might one day return from the stars. They were a living, breathing, whispering cache. They had preserved the memory of Earth not as data, but as culture. They had storytellers who spoke of New York and Tokyo. They sang folk songs about the moon landing. They practiced a form of government based on the old Terran democracies. They had remembered. For the first time in 7 years, I was not alone. I walked among my own kind, shared their food, listened to their stories. I saw children who looked like my brother, laughing and playing in the fields. The weight I had been carrying, the burden of being the last, began to lift. But my arrival had not gone unnoticed. My journey through the veil had been a desperate gamble, but the architects were patient, their logic relentless. They had been tracking the faint quantum signature of the Stellifer Memoria's memory drive. They didn't know where I was, but they knew the general direction. They had begun a systemic, grid-by-grid search. It was only a matter of time. I told Lynn everything about the architects, the ghost code, the Cathar, and the wounded god that was now hunting me. I told her that my presence here had doomed them, that I had led the wolf to this last hidden flock. She listened patiently, her expression serene. "We are not sheep to be slaughtered," she said, her voice firm. "We are the children of the Odyssey. We know the stories. We know that to be human is to struggle. You have not brought us doom. Echo, you have brought us a choice." That night, they held a council. They did not debate whether to fight. They debated how. They were a peaceful people, with no standing army, no warships. Their only defense was their ingenuity and the archives of old Earth, while their strategists debated, their engineers, led by a young, brilliant man named Reese, came to me. They had been studying my ship, the Vagrant, with a ravenous curiosity. The architect's weakness is their predictability. Reese said, his eyes alight with intellectual fire. Their strength is their network, their perfect communication. So, we must be unpredictable, and we must blind them. Their plan was audacious. They couldn't fight the Architect's fleet head-on, but they could use the Veil itself as a weapon. Reese and his team proposed modifying the Stellifer Memoria's core, turning the Heartstone not into a weapon of emotional feedback, but into a massive, reality-distorting broadcast device. Using the ship's archives specifically, the memories of theoretical physicists and quantum engineers, they believed they could create a mimetic storm, a targeted burst of chaotic, paradoxical information that would temporarily turn the fabric of space-time within the Veil into an incoherent soup. It would sever the Architect's connection to the Nexus, blinding their fleet and scrambling their perfect logic. It was a one-shot weapon. The power required would burn out the Heartstone, destroying the last great archive of humanity. I would have to sacrifice every ghost I carried, every memory of Earth, to protect this new, fragile shoot of human life. My 17 seconds of a summer afternoon, my brother's laughter, all of it, turned to fuel. A memory is worthless if there is no one left to remember it, Lynn said to me as I wrestled with the choice. You have carried our past. Let it be the shield for our future. As Reese and his team worked frantically to modify the ship, scouts on the edge of the Veil reported the first signs of the Architect's arrival. It wasn't a fleet of silencers. It was a single vessel, but it was immense, a geometric shape that seemed to absorb the light around it, its presence heralded by a localized warping of space. It was a world builder, a terraforming ship of immense power, the kind of tool the Architects use to create their perfect, orderly worlds. But a tool for creation can also be a tool for annihilation. They weren't coming to pacify this world. They were coming to erase it, to wipe the canvas clean. And commanding it, I knew, would be Proctor Valerius himself, coming to personally correct the flaw in his grand design. I stood on the bridge of the Stellifer Memoria for the last time, my hand on the Heartstone, now cold and pulsing with a strange, new energy. Below me, the people of the valley were preparing, not for a battle, but for a storm. They were moving their archives, their children, their future, into deep, shielded caverns. They were entrusting their survival to a ghost ship and the memory of a world they had never known. I could feel Valerius's mind touching the edges of the Veil, a cold, analytical presence testing the nebula's boundaries. He was cautious. He knew I was in here. He was expecting a trap. He just couldn't conceive of what kind. Are you ready? Alara. Kalen's echo asked, his voice now faint, a fading whisper in the sea of memories. I thought of Jax's sacrifice, of the Janai's song, of the Cathar's roar. I thought of the laughing children in the valley below. I closed my eyes and brought up my own small, perfect memory. The sun on my face, the smell of rain, the sound of a voice I would never hear again. Goodbye, I whispered. I opened my eyes, my hand steady on the console. Let them come, I said. It was time to show a god of order the true meaning of chaos. The world builder, a vessel so vast it eclipsed the local star, pushed into the Veil like a surgeon's scalpel into living tissue. Its advance was slow, methodical, preceded by waves of gravimetric energy that smoothed the nebula's chaotic currents, creating a corridor of calm, ordered space for it to travel through. Proctor Valerius wasn't just entering my sanctuary, he was sanitizing it as he went, imposing his sterile logic upon the very fabric of the cosmos. I could feel his consciousness, a vast and silent ocean of intellect, scanning, probing, searching for me. He knew I was the catalyst, but he still saw me as a singular, flawed variable. He couldn't comprehend that my strength no longer came from my own grief, but from the combined hope of a living world. Reese's voice crackled over the comm from the settlement below. The Heartstone modifications are complete. Ilara, we're reading a massive power buildup from the Architect vessel. They're preparing to fire. You have one chance. On my screen, I saw the energy signature he was talking about. The World Builder was charging its primary tool, the molecular deconstruction field. It was a weapon of terrifying elegance. It didn't burn or explode. It simply unwrote matter, disassembling a planet into its constituent atoms and scattering them to the void. It was the ultimate expression of the Architect's philosophy: if a thing is imperfect, it should not be corrected, but erased and begun anew. The time for stealth was over. I pushed the Stellifer Memoria's engines to life. The ship a final, desperate roar of defiance. I didn't flee. I flew directly towards the World Builder. Valerius's mind slammed into mine, no longer a cold probe, but a hammer of pure will. Your struggle is an illogical spasm. Terran, a pointless resistance against cosmic certainty. Your species was archived to preserve its essence from the chaos you embody. This, Echo, is a corrupted file. It is time for deletion. This time, I didn't fight his mental assault with rage or sorrow. I met it with the calm, steady strength of the people in the valley below. I showed him not the pain of our past, but the promise of their future, a child learning to read from a paper book, a farmer planting seeds in alien soil, two lovers watching the sunset. I showed him the stubborn, illogical, beautiful resilience of life. You can't preserve life by putting it in a jar. My thoughts answered his. You only preserve the shape of it. You've forgotten that the flaws, the chaos, the pain, that's part of the design. For a fleeting moment, I felt that flicker of dissonance in him again, the same hesitation I had felt at Cathar Prime, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by an unyielding, righteous certainty. The World Builder began its final firing sequence. Now, Reese, I yelled into the comm. From the planet's surface, a network of repurposed communication arrays fired a focus beam of energy at the Stellifer Memoria. It wasn't a weapon, but a catalyst, the final key needed to unlock the Heartstone's catastrophic potential. The energy struck the ship, and the memories within the core, 1 billion lives, 1,000 cultures. My 17 seconds of a summer afternoon began to resonate, to vibrate, to unravel. The ship around me started to come apart. The lights didn't just flicker, they exploded in showers of sparks. The bulkheads groaned, the metal warping under a strain that was not physical, but existential. The Heartstone at the center of the bridge was no longer a crystal. It was a miniature star of pure, white chaos, shedding layers of reality like an onion. I could feel the ghosts of humanity screaming and singing in a final, transcendent chorus. My brother's laughter was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The mimetic storm erupted from the ship in a silent, blossoming wave of pure paradox. It was a tsunami of illogical data, of impossible geometries, of sensory inputs that had no correlation in a rational universe. The corridor of calm space Valerius had carved into the veil collapsed instantly. The nebula roared back to life. not as a passive cloud of dust, but as a violent, unpredictable maelstrom. The effect on the world builder was instantaneous and absolute. Its perfect systems, designed to operate in a universe of predictable physical laws, were suddenly submerged in a sea of cosmic nonsense. Its navigation sensors reported it was in a million places at once, and also nowhere at all. Its communication systems, trying to contact the Nexus, were flooded with the sound of colors and the taste of prime numbers. The link was severed. Valerius was blind, deaf, and utterly alone, trapped in a bubble of insanity. The molecular deconstruction field, just moments from firing, wavered. The focused beam of energy lost its cohesion, dissolving into a beautiful but harmless aurora of shimmering light. The god was disarmed. Its thunderbolt turned to rain. But the storm was not selective. The Stellifer Memoria, its purpose fulfilled, was consumed by its own creation. I felt the floor dissolve beneath my feet, the console disintegrate under my hands. Kalen's echo gave one final, peaceful sigh and was gone. The ghosts were free. As my own consciousness began to unravel, I closed my eyes and held on to the one pure thing I had left: the feeling of sun on my skin, the smell of coming rain, the sound of a boy's laughter. I woke up adrift in the chaos, sealed inside the Vagrant's emergency cockpit, which had been automatically ejected moments before the mothership's destruction. The mimetic storm still raged around me, a tempest of light and shadow. But it was already starting to recede, its energy dissipating into the void. The world builder was still there, no longer a pristine instrument of order, but a crippled behemoth, scarred by reality fractures, its systems in a state of cascading failure. And then I saw it, a single, tiny escape pod, jettisoned from the dying giant. Logic dictated I should let it go, let Valerius die with his ship, a fitting end for a being who prized order above all else. But the faces of the children in the valley flashed in my mind. We had survived not just by fighting, but by choosing to be something other than our enemy. I snagged the pod in the Vagrant's weak tractor beam and pulled it into my cargo bay. The being that emerged was diminished. Proctor Valerius's geometric form was unstable, flickering, and translucent. His perfect chime-like voice was a discordant, static-laced whisper. He had been severed from the Nexus, the source of his power and his identity. He was just an individual now, a singular point of consciousness, lost in the wilderness. "You have broken the composition," he whispered. The words filled not with anger, but with a profound, desolate confusion. "There is only noise." "That noise," I said, my voice hoarse, "is called life, and it's not something you can archive." I didn't kill him. I didn't imprison him. I left him on the shores of a small, uninhabited moon at the edge of the veil, with enough recycled air and nutrients to last for years. I left him to confront the silence he had so eagerly sought to impose on others, a silence now filled with the echo of his own colossal failure. Perhaps, in that solitude, he would learn what he had tried to erase from the rest of the galaxy, what it means to be alone. The Terran settlement on the New World, which they named Kalen's Rest, survived. The mimetic storm had permanently altered the nebula, making it forever impassable to architect hyperlane travel. They were safe, a pocket of chaotic, beautiful, illogical humanity, free to build a future from the ashes of their past. My war was over. The architects, wounded and facing dozens of uprisings across the galaxy, sparked by the echoes of Cathar Prime, had turned inward. Their grand design fractured. They would survive, but their crusade to bring silence to the universe was over. The galaxy was loud again, chaotic and dangerous and alive. I never returned to Kalen's Rest. My fight was done. But I was still a ghost, a relic of a dead world. I took the vagrant and pointed it towards the lawless frontiers, not looking for a fight, but for a quiet place to listen. I became a storyteller, a myth whispered in the bars of the shroud. They say there's a woman out there who collects echoes, who can show you the memory of a world where the sky was blue and the rain smelled of life. I still have one archive left, a copy I made before sacrificing the Heartstone. Just 17 seconds. Sometimes, on the long, quiet nights, I play it back, not for the pain, not for the vengeance, but for the reminder. A reminder that the grandest, most orderly design in the universe is no match for the simple, chaotic, defiant sound of a child's laughter. The silence was broken not by a roar, but by a whisper of a memory that now had a future. And in a noisy, imperfect galaxy, that was a victory greater than any I could have imagined.